Hello and welcome everybody. In this video I will show how I painted the Beastmen Doombull. Here is the list of paints I've used. I may have forgotten a few here and there, I apologize for that. The base I used for this miniature I will show in another video, which should be up soon. After cleaning and pinning the model, I gave it a coat of Tamiya grey primer. I decided to paint the pieces separate to make it easier. When the primer was dry, I gave it a light dusting of white primer from the top of the model. I started pre-shading the shadow areas of the skin using a mix of mahogany and black. When this was done, I gave the skin a light coat of green-brown mixed with US light grey. I now added some burnt umber to the shadow areas of the skin. Next up, I added some green-brown to the raised areas of the skin. I highlighted the skin using US light grey and a tiny drop of green-brown. I made the shadows a bit richer using a glaze of mahogany and black. The raised areas were also glazed using green-brown. For the highlights of the skin, I used a glaze of US light grey and green-brown. I make my glazes using 1 part paint, 10 parts distilled water and some glaze medium. I undercoated his body armor using a mix of cold grey and rust. I now masked off the skin and applied some shadows using a mix of German grey and rust. To give the metal a more tarnished look, I applied some burnt umber to the shadows. I highlighted the metal parts using light grey. When this was done, I made an edge highlight on all the metal parts using white. Afterwards, I gave all the recesses a thin glaze of black. I then started on the leather parts. I first gave it a base coat of wood mixed with US light grey. I then started stippling in some German camo black brown. I used mahogany brown in the same way. I gave an edge highlight to the leather using wood mixed with white. When this was done, I gave it a wash of Army Painter Strong Tone, followed up with some Army Painter Flash Wash. I followed the same steps for all his wristbands, only this time I used Army Painter Soft Tone ink. I painted the nails, skulls and bones using a mix of khaki and white. I then glazed the shadows on them using camo medium brown. I highlighted them using a glaze of white. I then started painting the hair. I used Beastie Brown to do this. When this was done, I base coated the chainmail using a mix of German grey and rust. I now made a pattern in his mane. I used camo medium brown to do this. I then highlighted the hair using skin tone from above. To make the chainmail a bit more tarnished, I used some burnt umber. The shield plate on his belt was base coated using red leather. I then highlighted it using skin tone. The rings on his armor were painted using liquid copper. I then used liquid red gold for his nose ring and earrings. I base coated his mouth using a mix of violet red and pink. I also painted his eye sockets using violet. After painting the eyeball white, I gave it a wash of Army Painter purple tone. When the wash was dry, I painted his eye using Tamiya clear red. I then started painting the axe. I base coated the blade using a mix of cold grey and blue. When this was dry, I started shading it using a mix of German grey and blue. Afterwards, I made the highlights using a mix of light grey and blue. To give the model some extra protection, I gave it a coat of gloss varnish. This will also be useful for the oil wash I will apply later. I started shading the axe a bit more, using a glaze of black mixed with blue. I did the same for the highlights on the axe, using a glaze of white and blue. The wood parts of the axe were painted using a mix of flat earth and US light grey. I then applied a wash over the wood bits using Army Painter Strong Tone. In between, I also edge highlighted the blade in the same way I did the armor. I did this off camera. I decided to make some runes on his gear. Instead of freehanding, I decided to cheat and use this stencil I have here. I cut out a small strip and attached it to the armor using masking tape. I then airbrushed over the stencil using mahogany. For the blade of the axe, I also used a stencil. I used German grey to do this. At this stage, I will make and apply an oil wash. I use a tiny bit of paint and dilute it with some odorless white spirit. I made a few washes this way using burnt umber, Van Dyke brown and raw sienna. I applied burnt umber to all the hair and the mane. Because of the gloss varnish, I only have to tap the brush to the model and the wash will flow by itself. I used Van Dyke brown to some areas where I wanted deep shadows to be. For the bones and horns, I used raw sienna. After letting the wash dry for 2 hours, I now remove the excess wash using a makeup sponge dipped in white spirit. When the white spirit was dry, I now applied a final coat of satin varnish. This will help remove the glossiness of the oil paint as well. When the varnish was dry, I now assembled the model using super glue. So now it's time for the base. I decided to use this awesome green base I have here. I applied a very thick coat of green paint and made 2 footprints on it. Unfortunately, I lost my awesome green base, so until I find it again, this base will have to do. My next video will be a complete tutorial on how I made this base, so stay tuned for that one. So that'll wrap up this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and that it was of any use to you. I will leave you now with some pictures of the finished model. As always, thank you for watching, stay tuned for more and take care.
Work complete.